Angeles riots, as a lot of people like to call it. Now, of course, it wasn't confined to the city of Los Angeles, but Los Angeles was the epicenter because you actually had protests all over the United States and even in Canada. So, it's interesting because everybody acts like it only happened in L.A. I could ask you, brother, how old were you in 1992?
Well, when the riots went on, I was about 12.
So you'll be a little young to remember this, but what was very interesting that happened during the riots, as they call it, there was college students down in Georgia at schools like Spelman College who discovered on campus law enforcement had all their names and files.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of that?
No.
Oh, yeah. So for the folks out there who hear this, do your little research. Because all these little boule folks going to these schools like Spelman and Morehouse, they thought they're they're part of the system and they're not deemed a threat the way hip-hop artists and rap artists in the inner city, lower income neighborhoods might be. But oh yeah, in fact what happened was I guess there was a demonstration at Morehouse and they ended up taking down a campus security guard shack. And when they went through the computer files, they found their names in there, man. And that didn't get a lot of media attention anyway. So the reason I mention this because what happened regarding the civil unrest, regarding what happened here with the epicenter in Los Angeles, I had been warning LAPD cops about that for more than a year. Because I was teaching at the LAPD Academy at the time. So I have hundreds of former LAPD recruits who can attest to the fact that I was telling my recruits more than a year before it happened that the 4 officers involved in the incident with Rodney King would be found not guilty, and they were going to see the largest riots in U.S. history. Now, of course, people who outrank me, they all call me conspiratorial, paranoid, don't know what I'm talking about. I didn't hear any of them talking that crap on 29 April 1992. And after the civil unrest, in the month of May of 1992, a friend of mine kept insisting that I listen to a radio show. So for you folks out there who hear this, when the brother's alluding to Carl, who he's referring to is Carl Nelson. Carl Nelson is one of the most unbelievable black journalists in U.S. history. And it saddens me sometimes because Carl never toots his horn. Most people have no idea who Carl Nelson is, but just to give you an idea of who he is, he was the first journalist to interview Nelson Mandela when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison to go back to South Africa. Okay? So Carl was hosting a radio show out here in L.A. called Front Page on Stevie Wonder's radio station. And there was a female who was a close friend of mine who kept insisting that I had to listen to this show. And the show comes on like 4:30 in the morning. 4:30 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the morning. So I started listening to the show. And she wanted me to always call in. I'm like, I'm not calling into that show. But brother, man, and sadly the same thing's happening today. When I started hearing our folks coming on the radio and just talking so much nonsense and worse, telling on themselves on the radio. I mean, a lot of folks, the things they were saying on the radio could get them arrested. I'm like, why are people coming on air on an FM station and putting all their personal business out there? Of course, you know what that's been replaced by today, right?
Right. The net.
Social media, right?
Right.
Because I think the best line I heard all week came from one of the shows that you participated in.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what that quote is?
No.
Apparently, there was some guy you all were talking about that had been flashing money.
Right. Right. Yeah, Pooh Shiesty, a guy is a rapper.
And flashing that money, where was he flashing that money?
On Instagram. And
yeah, go ahead.
And yeah, he was flashing the money on Instagram, and later on in the shooting scene, the money with the same serial numbers from the Instagram was found at the scene. We can't make up these stories.
But you had a brother who said, "Wait a minute, this mofo is flashing money on Instagram. Doesn't he know FBI?" Facebook and Instagram is the FBI movie channel.
Right.
And I was rolling, dude. I was like, no shit. I was like, what's wrong with these people? They've been putting all their personal business out there. All their personal business. So, on Fridays, Carl had what was called Open Phone Friday, where anybody could call in and discuss what had been discussed previously during the week. So I had gotten to the point where, damn. All right, I'm going to call into this show so I can shut some of these confused Negroes up, right? So I came on a Friday morning, and I said, I hear a lot of folks come on this radio station talking loud and saying nothing. Worse, you don't have a clue to what's really going on. So this is what I told them, brother. Now, this was in May of 1992. I said, in 1965, you had the Watts riots. What was the impetus for the Watts riots? A black man, possibly DUI, stopped by the Highway Patrol. 1992, you had the civil unrest, 1992 riots. What was the impetus? A black man, possibly DUI, stopped by the Highway Patrol. 1965, on the first night of the Watts Rebellion, as they call it, Watts riots, LAPD Chief William H. Parker and LAPD were slow to respond because Parker was at a fundraiser. 1992, LAPD Chief Darrell Gates and LAPD were slow to respond to the civil unrest because Darrell Gates was at a fundraiser. 1965, at the end of the riots, former CIA Director John McCone came in and investigated the riots. 1992, former CIA and former FBI Director William Webster came into LA to investigate after the riots. I go, the script worked so well in 1965, they did it in 1992 again, and you folks are so dumb, you don't even realize you've been played. And I hung up. Okay? So, after my little rat on that show that particular Friday morning, calls just bombarded Stevie Wonder station KJLH out here, 102.3 FM. And they're like, who the hell was that? We got to get this brother back on the show. Well, at that time, I was in the Marine Corps Reserves as an officer. I was working at the academy, as I said earlier, so I hadn't become a supervisor yet. I was an instructor at the academy. I was not going to come on that radio show identifying myself as who I really am. So I adopted the name, the nom de guerre, Mark from Anaheim. I'm not Mark, I'm not from Anaheim. And that's how the whole thing began. And what I would end up doing was coming on a Friday morning and just blasting them with knowledge instead of bullshit, okay? And I always told folks, just like telling anybody who hears this, do not believe anything I tell you. You do your own research, but I challenge you to come back and say that I provided you with lies, misinformation, or disinformation.
I'm gonna say I'm a student of that because I had to look up some of this, all the shit that you say, and it's all true. And you even told me about a book that I haven't even read, but I bought it because I said, let me buy these books, which is called Blood Oath. And so,
okay, we'll come back to Blood Oath. Let's hold
right.
on for Blood Oath.
Go ahead.
We'll come back to Blood Oath. So what happened was, sadly, Carl was working at KJLH. So I'm not going to say sadly because, the brother branched out on his own and got himself his own radio station down in Fort Lauderdale. So I was doing radio shows with Carl Nelson down in Fort Lauderdale on WSRF AM. Until Hurricane Andrew hit. And Hurricane Andrew did so much damage to the building, Carl ended up having to give up his holdings in that station. Well, prior to Hurricane Andrew, I had already stopped doing shows Carl, because in 2001, what was the most famous thing that happened in 2001?
The trade centers, right?
And guess who had been warning Carl Nelson's listeners about that, or something similar to that, for several months prior to it happening?
You.
So, when 9/11 happened, as they call it, I had not had enough time in the Marine Corps Reserves that I could just get out. In protest of 9/11, I quit the Marine Corps on 11/9. And I had a retirement party out here at a place called Cowboy Country in Long Beach, where more than 700 rednecks, cowboys, cowgirls, cops, law armed forces, the U.S. Armed Forces came and watched me retire from Marine Corps Reserves. And for those of you who have no idea what Cowboy Country is, you've probably seen the movie Thelma and Louise. In that movie Thelma and Louise, when they're doing the line dance, they're not in Oklahoma as the movie suggests. Back in those days, Cowboy Country was called Silver Bullet. And that's where they did the line scenes, and you'll even see the name Silver Bullet outside the location in the movie. Incidentally, guess who helped Gina Davis before she did that movie?
I would say Mark from Anaheim, because you're a technical range advisor for several popular Hollywood movies.
And what was ironic or coincidental was a week later, because she was recently divorced, I helped her former husband. You know who that was?
No.
Jeff Goldblum. And he, along with, back then we called him Larry, but now he calls himself Lawrence. He and Larry Fishburne were doing the movie Deep Cover. Now, for you folks out there who haven't seen Deep Cover, I highly recommend you see that movie. In fact, you know what? I think that movie is supposed to be Detroit. Now that I think about it.
Deep Cover.
Oh, dude, you gotta see that movie. Are you familiar with a brother named Glenn Turman?
No.
Yeah, you are. You just don't know it. He used to be married to Aretha Franklin. Real cowboy. But you know, black folks were cowboys before white folks were anyway, but most people, they're too ignorant to know that. Cowboys came from, like, you know, we talk about bull riding and rodeos. Of course, today we have the Bill Ticket Invitational Rodeo and a few others. Sadly, I see more white folks at those events than I see black folks. But anyway, when the ranchers were doing their things in places like Texas and all that, well, the people who actually did most of the rustling and handling the livestock were brown and black folks. And when these guys got a break, they would end up doing things like seeing who could ride a bull or ride a horse. That's where rodeos come from. See, most people don't know that. Well, those folks weren't white folks. Those were the black and brown folks who were the hands working on those ranches. So I laugh when people see me wearing a cowboy hat and they're like, "Yeehaw!" And I'm like, "Ignorance, just shut the hell up, shut up." And black folks don't even realize it. It's like I was featured. I don't know too many black folks, but I was featured in Professional Bull Rider magazine a few years ago. But I say all this to you because if you watch the movie Straight Outta Compton, there's actually a reference to the movie Deep Cover. And the reason I recommend people see the movie Deep Cover, because there's a great line in the movie. See, Larry Fishburne is a cop.
Right.
That is now working with the FBI and DEA undercover. And there's a scene in the movie where he says, "For all this time, I thought I was a cop pretending to be a drug dealer. I ain't nothing but a drug dealer pretending to be a cop." Because what he found out, they only want to go after certain people. When he started going after the big boys, and you know the big boys were melon and challenged, all of a sudden they're telling him to stand down.
Right.
As long as he was taking down the mid-level colored folks and the low-level colored folks, hey, he was a good Negro. He was doing his job. Okay.
Right. Same as White Boy Rick, man. I understand.
So it's interesting too because you know I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the reasons I started doing shows with Carl Nelson here in LA knew my voice would be recognized on the radio. And I would never be able, LAPD would never be able to use me to work those bullshit undercover assignments. Because see, this is typical of what police departments do. They take black folks who are low ranking and they put them on loan to detectives. And then they use these folks until they can't use them no more. And these guys either burn out, retire, burn out, kill themselves, burn out, go back to patrol, without ever having attained the rank of detective. You hearing what I'm saying?
Right.
In fact, some of these guys work these units for so long that since they never wear a uniform, people actually think they are detectives. When in fact, if they come back to wear a uniform, these guys don't have any stripes, or maybe have 2 stripes. Meanwhile, the white boys they're working with, guess what they do? They get promoted to detectives. So I never wanted to have them use me working any undercover assignments like that. So doing that radio show was a real godsend for me, because I actually got called in, since you're mentioning blood oath, and I'll bring that back up with the blood oath thing and how this is connected in me doing that radio show. But what I'm saying for the folks out there, the movie is a little dated, but see the movie deep cover, because in that movie, Glenn Turman is Larry Fishburne's father. And in that movie, Glenn Turman has no money. He's broke. And sadly, he gets caught up. Well, actually, he has a son, because I'm not giving much away. His son is only very young. But every father wants to be able to, because we buy into this bullshit Christmas, right? Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you, what do you know about Christmas?
Well, I learned a lot of it when I was over in Spain. They called it over there. They called it the Coca-Cola holiday. I learned a lot.
Because one, and it's sad how many colored folks buy into this shit. See, these are all German Teutonic practices. 40% of this country is German, by the way. Folks don't know that. And they bring their crap over here and practice it, and then we copy them as if it's something that is part of our history or lexicon, And when it comes to Christmas, even for those who read the Bible, they were talking about harvesting the crops. So I'm going to ask you, brother, do we harvest crops in this country during the month of December in the coldest part of the winter?
In Michigan, no.
Exactly. So what the hell is wrong with people? And when they talk about December 25th, they're not talking about the sun, S-O-N, as in the Son of God. They're talking about the S-U-N, because these folks worship the sun. Now, we just got into the summer solstice. So
Right.
That means already the days are getting shorter. Well, with the winter solstice, that starts on December 21st. And these folks who worship the sun, they would have a stick in the ground and see the shadow cast on the ground by the sun. Well, around December 21st, all of a sudden, there's no movement in the shadow. So these folks believe the sun had died. I'm not making this shit up. I don't make up anything I share, okay? But on December 21st, guess what happens? The shadow starts getting longer again. So that's the rebirth of the S-U-N, not the S-O-N. So all these folks out there celebrating Christmas on December 25th and stuff, they're practicing what the sun worshipers do. And I should tell you this, for those who are Christians and read their Bibles, do you know there's a specific passage in the Bible that tells you, do not cut a tree down and bring it into your house to worship?
Right. Yeah, it is.
Okay, so, it amazes me the confusion we have. But anyway, I digress. So the brother, Glenn Turman, he's playing the father, and he bought into the Christmas crap. And he wants to please his son because everybody else has Christmas presents. He has no money. So what does he do? He goes and robs a liquor store. And he gets shot and killed in the process. And that's what kind of set the pace for Larry Fishburne as a child, being right there in the car with his dad who died. with the chump change he was even able to get out of that liquor store, the money had blood all over it, and it wasn't worth it. So from that day forward, Larry Fishburne said he was never going to be like his dad, you know, and then he ends up becoming a Detroit cop. I'm pretty sure it was Detroit Police Department. So that's what the premise of the movie is. And he wants to eradicate the drugs in the community that leads to the, you know, the high crime rate. So, you know, he's a brother trying to make a difference. Because, you know, he doesn't realize who the real players are. He doesn't realize once you get to a certain level, the DEA looks the other way. Okay. So anyway, in 2001, I had already decided not to do any more shows with Carl because one of the things that happened as a result of 9/11 is Congress allowed Bush to enact the Patriot Act. Now, are you familiar with the Patriot Act?
Yes, I'm very familiar with the Patriot Act. Yeah, with the
And
Bush.
I realized by coming on the radio and sharing the information I was sharing, they could label me a domestic terrorist and put my ass down there in Guantanamo Bay. Which, by the way, we still have people to this day that have never been charged with a crime.
Still in Guantanamo. You saying they still in Guantanamo?
You heard me. Didn't Obama campaign about how he was going to shut that down? That was one of his campaign promises. When he got in the White House, he was going to shut down Gitmo. Do you remember that?
Right.
Is it shut down?
No.
Do you even know how we got Gitmo?
I know Gitmo is a part of Cuba. I never understood that. It's like a little piece of Cuba. But ain't they in beef with Cuba or something like that? How can you own a piece?
So I'm going to ask you again. Do you know how we got Gitmo?
No.
Thank you. See, what I tell you before. All right, for you folks who listen to that, I'm hard on my brother, okay? And there's always a meaning to my madness. You go to court and they ask you a yes or no question, just answer yes or no. Because they're going to take that and use it against you. And you're hanging yourself. Because I'm going to tell you, just like myself, okay? I think as an attorney, I don't give a damn about becoming one. And I've had lots of people trying to get me to go and to take the bar or whatever. Because you don't have, by the way, you don't have to go to law school to take the bar. You know that, right?
No, I didn't know that. I know Kim, whatever.
You don't have to. You don't have to go to law school to take the bar. But the problem is, if you do take the bar and pass it, and you don't happen to have one of these so-called prestigious law degrees hanging on your wall, the chances of you getting hired by a law firm are not very good. Which is interesting because probably 40% of all legal work today in this country is not even done by people in this country. They outsource it to people in places like India. That's why things are so fucked up in this country. Because people in India, they don't know U.S. law, especially U.S. law like in Detroit. So, anyway, what happened was, to give you an idea about Gitmo, and I have not been able to find out definitively, so I'll just give you two theories. One, back in those days, U.S. Navy ships had boilers on them. And apparently a boiler blew up on the ship down in Cuba, in the Cuban area. And this was a godsend, because, you know, there's certain people out there who tell you, never let a disaster go to waste. Have you heard that? Republicans are masters at this. Whether they were responsible for it or not, they will always take a disaster and use it for their political agenda. So what you had was a ship called the USS Maine, just like the state of Maine. And this ship blew up down there in the 1880s. Now, I have not been able to determine one way or the other whether it was an accidental explosion, because there's some people who claim that ship was blown up on purpose down in Havana to get the U.S. into the Spanish-American War. That's what got us into the Spanish-American War. And Cuba is one of the places that, after the war, the U.S. claimed as its own. Well, Gitmo, I should say, Guantanamo Bay, is one of those areas that the U.S. claimed as its own. Philippines is another place. Folks don't realize Spain, the Spaniards are motherfuckers, dude.
Yeah, I stayed in Spain briefly, man. I've been all the way from Madrid all the way down to Javier.
You talk about some, because I don't use the term racism. You talk about some bigoted motherfuckers. You get into Spain and Portugal, dude, you're a bigotry haven. Okay? So, if you were all over Spain, here's what I'm asking you. Who's the largest landowner in the United States?
I don't know offhand.
Good answer, see? Folks have to be able to own up and just say, I don't know. I don't understand why people start...
I mean, hold on. If it was me, I'll say Bill Gates. Because he's buying it up. But,
So if people don't know something, just say you don't know.
Right.
Instead of making up shit or trying to type it in and trying to find the answer while you're online and all that stuff. The largest owner of land in this country is the Catholic Church. Didn't even think about that, did you?
Didn't know. I mean, I know they got some large land. They do here in Michigan. They do.
Oh, they have land.
Now that I'm looking at it.
They have land in Michigan you don't even know is their land. Because they don't always put a church on that land because a lot of that land was taken from the Native Americans. Are you familiar with the doctrine of Christian discovery?
Right. Yeah, the doctrine of discovery. Yep. Also, the papal bull. Same.
And so you're saying papal bull. So what religion was that?
Catholic.
Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. So you had the Catholics and other Christians who were given permission by the church. You go out and discover the world, as you call it, and you have a choice. You can kill them, or you can convert them to Christianity. So when you look at a country like Philippines, the number one bear in the Philippines is San Miguel. What kind of name is that?
That's Spanish.
Exactly. Because they belong, well, let me rephrase that. Spain had occupied them too. But Spain lost that during the Spanish-American War. And you know how in the United States they have lynchings of colored folks?
Right.
Because Irish were lynched too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that.
In fact, Irish were called niggers in this country before blacks were.
Right. That's where they know they survived off the potatoes. That's a lot of what the sea moss come from.
And so when the Irish were trying to figure out a way not to be lynched anymore, that's when we started using terms like black and white to identify people. A lot of folks don't realize that.
No, they don't.
That's how the Irish and Sicilians, all of a sudden, their rate of being lynched was toned down because they're like, okay, yeah, we're Italian. Yeah, we might be Sicilians who got raped by the Moors, but guess what? Look at our skin. We're white like you are. Them motherfuckers over there, they ain't white. Because most countries don't identify people by pigmentation. And before that, you were always identified by what country you came from. See what I'm saying? In fact, even if you look in the old slave books where they documented their slaves, they identified them as Moors, as from Sierra Leone.
Well, I know when I was in Spain, Mark, I was in Valencia, and so I studied a lot of the Catholic churches. You know what I'm saying, where it was a lot of the stolen art and it was a lot of stolen shit. A lot of Moorish temples and everything that they had was converted back over to the Catholic churches, and you had to uncover it all. It was wild. But a lot of white people there, to me, they was gold. They wasn't like typical white people here I've seen in America.
Well, no, I'm not talking present day. Okay, I'm talking about back during the time when the USS Maine blew up.
Right.
I'm talking about back in the day when the Philippines was occupied by Spain. These got motherfuckers were ruthless. You ever seen the movie Amistad?
Right, yeah, I seen Amistad. Matter of fact, I just watched it over the pandemic because my wife never seen it. And
who owned the ship?
Okay, who owned the ship?
Yeah.
I don't know. All I know.
You don't remember the little girl? She was only a fucking little girl, but she was the queen, and she wanted her property back. And you have no right taking my slaves because that's my property.
Oh yeah, that's the queen. Yeah. Amistad with the queen. Yeah, it was.
And the queen, but what country?
That was Spain.
Thank you. So this is what I'm talking about, and you're talking about present day. See, I'm giving the folks some history here, so don't try to confuse the folks by saying your personal experience. Okay?
Right.
So anyway, these motherfuckers were ruthless. And that's how we got Guantanamo Bay, because we needed a base in that region, a naval, to project the Navy power. I don't give a shit what people talk about. See, trust me, when it comes to, as they use the term, military tactics, dude, that's my forte. And you cannot project your power without a strong Navy. Who has the largest Navy on the planet?
Believe today is the U.S., but China is far behind. I mean, they're not too far behind.
You believe that, huh? China is far behind. Anyway, the British had the largest Navy. That's why they were the empire. The U.S. now has it. That's why we're the empire. But since you mentioned China, they will, and it's by design, by the way, they will overtake the U.S. as the dominant naval force, and guess who will be the next empire?
And the Manchurians. I mean, isn't the old Manchuria?
So, back during that time, as the U.S. was now beginning to catch up to the British Navy, part of projecting the power was Cuba. In fact, that's why we also had the Panama Canal, because it was a very long trip traveling around to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
So, certain countries just get together and take people's land and build a Panama Canal through Panama so we can cut off something like 800 miles of travel.
Well, no, was they saying that canal was already there? They were saying it was already a canal there prior to that. They just, made it better.
Ships couldn't go through it.
Right. Okay. I mean,
And then they give Jimmy Carter shit because there was a 100-year deal. Jimmy Carter was president when the 100-year deal was up. He gives it back to Panama, and these John Birch Society motherfuckers go off, man. Calling him weak and everything else. It wasn't ours to begin with.
No,
okay? But, doctrine of discovery. Hey, we like this. We're coming in and taking
Isn't that where what's my man Noriega, the Noriega war, the Panama Wars?
Well, you're talking about the Panama invasion.
Yeah, the Panama invasion. I have a cousin. That was in that, and he gets checks to this day. You know what I'm saying? He's seen some.
Do you even know what that operation was called?
No.
Operation Just Cause. And I used to tell people, just cause we can fucking do it. Because you can't stop us. But with Panama, that cut off a lot of the miles people had to have. And since you brought up Operation Just Cause, because everything's connected. Didn't some guy from the TV show Cops just die? Bad boys, what you gonna do?
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
And that show used to always feature, like Dade County Police Department and all that kind of shit,
Yeah, they did. I wonder why they never would come up to Detroit with the bad boys. I used to always wonder.
Well, what I'm telling you about that show and that cop, that guy was involved in major drug dealings, right? And major money laundering, right?
No, I didn't know that. I know it's supposedly what that was the one with
Have you ever seen
Have
a movie with Cheatham called Swordfish?
Yes, with John Travolta or something.
There you go. Damn, I like that. And there was also the guy who plays Wolverine from the X-Men movie.
Was he in there? I didn't know. I need to go back.
He's a computer expert.
Right. Some of these old movies you got to go back and look like, damn, he was in this. I couldn't,
Well, you have to go back. I don't have to go back. But anyway, so I'm just telling you folks, you want to do some research, forget the movie. The movie doesn't come close to what was really going on. And there was an operation called Swordfish. So that's something for you folks to write down, Operation Swordfish. Because in that operation, when money laundering was at a major, as we were getting into Reagan with all his deregulation of the banking and stuff, and they destroyed the savings and loans. Because the savings and loans is how most people in this country were finally able to get a loan to buy a home. That was created by FDR during the New Deal. And they wanted you to go back to the banks and get ripped off. So they just basically stole the money out of the savings and loan. By going into Panama, they were able to get access to a lot of those islands down in that region where they just took over the offshore banking. I'm sure somebody who hears this show is now going to go out and do an expose news magazine article and get some awards because they don't know shit what I'm talking about. But now they go do research and act like they came up with this idea. But it's all good because at least the information gets out there. So, a lot of cops, dirty cops in Florida, a lot of DEA, a lot of politicians. Yeah, Operation Swordfish. Check that out. That movie doesn't come close to what was really going on. But there was an Operation Swordfish.
Yeah, that had a lot of dealing with the drug money towards the the drug war.
Well, what the movie shows you is how they had set up CIA front businesses so that Congress wouldn't even know what they were doing with the black budget. Do you know what a black budget is?
No.
You remember how they love to tell you, oh, the government is so inept. They are paying $798 for a hammer. You know, they'll tell you about something like they paid $1,000 for toilets.
Yeah, they overpay.
No, they don't. That toilet cost them $12. That $988 from that $1,000 went into a black budget. See what I'm telling you?
Mm.
You're told the toilet cost $1,000. What you're not told is that money didn't really go for a toilet. The vast majority of that money went to something we don't talk about. That's a black budget. So that's something else you folks can write down and do some research on. We don't talk about black budgets. So nobody will ever know. I don't give a damn. When you hear somebody tell you how much money is being spent on the Defense Department, anybody who tells you that is either ignorant or full of shit because they have no idea, and they never will, how much money is spent on the budget. You ever watch the TV show Scandal?
A few episodes. Kerry Washington?
And do you remember who her father was in that TV show?
No.
But he was a guy who was supposedly in charge of a super secret intelligence unit that didn't even answer to the president. Well, that whole unit was funded by black budget. Off the books, dude. There ain't no record of it. They're accountable to nobody. In fact, I'll tell you another one is Operation Yellow Fruit. Let me write this down because I have to remember what I talked to you about on the show.
Hold up. Operation
Yellow Fruit. That was an interesting one because this white army captain, well, I think he was a major. He was working at the Pentagon, and one day some stuff come across his desk, and he's like, "What the hell is this?" Because he didn't realize he might think he's a major in the army, but he wasn't really on the inside. See what I'm saying? He might have been working with people on the inside, but he was not an insider.
Yeah, he's not an insider.
So he didn't know anything about Operation Yellow Fruit, and he started asking questions, which caused a whole lot of problems. Because that even involved the Iran-Contra. And I'm just going to tell you folks out there, the John Birch Society, you'll hear me mention them several times on this show today.
Why were you talking about the Iran-Contra? There's a lot about the Shaws, because I know they got a show out right now, but the Shah was overthrew from Iran. What was that about, really?
Okay. I'll write that down, because, see, you're not going to do to me what you do on phone calls where I'm going down one hole and you're taking me someplace else and I don't finish what I was saying.
Right, go ahead.
So, with Iran-Contra, most folks don't understand this, okay? The John Birch Society they're running the damn U.S. Senate. They're running the U.S. House of Representatives now. They run the Supreme Court, and until Trump was booted out recently, they were running the White House. you go back to Iran-Contra, most folks didn't even know, they couldn't even find Nicaragua on a map, okay, because people don't want to study geography, U.S. history, world history, social studies. You had this redneck boy from Georgia, former Marine. His name was Eugene Hassenfuss. And Eugene Hassenfuss got shot down over Nicaragua. By the way, he was flying on a Barry Seals airplane. So for you folks out there who've never seen the movie because you fell for the bullshit about Harvey Weinstein, everybody knows Harvey Weinstein is damn creepy. In fact, the Eagles, back in 1979, had an album called The Long Run. You look on that album, The Long Run, and they have a song about the Hollywood director, who's obviously Harvey Weinstein. So if that was in 1979, why are you folks acting so fucking like shocked up about Harvey Weinstein in the 21st century?
Yeah, Harvey is on a lot of shit. He funny.
Harvey went down because he made the movie American Made.
Right.
And the movie American Made shows you everything about bringing the drugs in. The same drugs that caused the cocaine cowboy wars, the same drugs that caused massive amounts of murders on the streets of Detroit, LA, New York, Atlanta. During Reagan's years, because he was John versus Society, they got busted because Hasselfuss got shut down. He told these folks, you don't even know who the fuck I am or who I work for. And they're like looking at this redneck, yeah, okay. And then they find his little black book. And in his little black book, he's got the names and phone numbers of people working in the White House. Also the name of the guy where Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia had that convenient death down there on that Bohemian Grove ranch down in Texas. That was Admiral Poindexter's ranch, by the way. Where you folks out there?
Yeah, the guy that got shot or whatever. Yeah. Oh, no, Andrew Scalia was the that was the judge from the Supreme Court.
Said
yeah.
Supreme Court
Yeah,
Justice.
you're right.
I said the ranch was owned by John Poindexter.
Okay.
So anyway, Admiral Poindexter did that. So anyway, so with Iran-Contra, you look at the players, the major players in Iran-Contra. A lot of those folks were back in the Trump administration. And they're back to their same old dirty tricks. The difference this time around, though, is the only reason we even know about Iran-Contra, they were illegally using taxpayers' money without permission from Congress. See what I'm saying?
Right.
So when you talk about Ollie North and all these guys who testified, now Ollie North was supposed to be leading the war on drugs, because, you know, they always declare war and everything. But, you know, actually the war on drugs started during the Nixon administration. And you know what the war on drugs was all about, right?
I mean, basically taking down Go ahead.
It was a war on niggas. Now people who are, you know, out of administrations and don't care anymore, they actually write books and brag about it, that when Nixon was president, they used the war on drugs as a guise to go after the black population. And one of the things I will have to tell you that was significant about the Iran-Contra hearings, Ollie North was asked by Senator Inouye. Inouye was this Japanese descent senator, U.S. senator from Hawaii, who was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Inouye gets upset because somebody in the room started asking Ollie North a question about, well, did President Reagan give you all permission to do this? And Ollie North goes, we are members of the National Security Council. We are better informed than the president. And in the event of national security, if we see that is deemed necessary, we will simply, listen to what I'm telling you, suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we already have in place a plan to round up 25 million people. You want to know what the population of black folks were in this country when he said that?
What was it?
25 million people. And he didn't say 25 million people minus the black ministers. Because see, those are your house Negroes that are always the pipeline telling on the black community. Notice how all your black leaders, your so-called black leaders, are always somebody who's a minister. Even Jesse Jackson, who's doesn't even have a church, but he's the Reverend Jesse Jackson. See, that's the boule. Those are the house Negroes. When Dylan Roof shot up in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, he shut up the first AME church. Now, the first AME church would be the oldest church in the United States for AME. I've never figured out what the hell AME is. How the fuck can you be an African, a Methodist, and an Episcopalian at the same time? But hey, it is what it is. And if that makes you guys happy, you go to bed tonight smiling, knock yourself out, okay? See, when I look at names, I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But, you know, if that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. So, anyway, the reason that First AME Church is no longer the oldest AME church because the original was burned down. See, people talk about Denmark Vesey. They talk about John Brown. Most folks don't know about the Stonewall Rebellion. Are you familiar with the Stonewall Rebellion?
No.
That was one of the largest slave uprisings in U.S. history.
How you spell that? You said the Stormo.
S as in Sam, T as in Tom, O, N as in Nancy, O. Stonewall Rebellion.
Okay.
I grew up, well, I didn't grow up, I got older. I never grew up. As a young child, I lived along the Stonewall River on Johns Island, South Carolina, because I'm Gullah Geechee.
Right.
Typical, they held their meeting in that First AME church on their plan on freeing the slaves at all the plantations around Charleston. And typical, a little house nigger from AME church, what do you think he did?
What?
He warned the slave owners. So that was another unsuccessful freedom of slavery because you always have somebody who looks like you who's going to sell you out. As we say, just because you're skin folk don't mean you're kinfolk. Well, these whites killed all the leaders of the rebellion and put their heads on spikes all around the city to warn future slaves, don't try this shit. And then they burned down the First AME Church. That's why the First AME Church in Charleston right now, the Emmanuel AME Church, is no longer the oldest existing AME church in the United States because the original was burned down. I guess that's your reward for coming and telling us, good nigger, I'm glad you told us. Now we're going to burn your fucking church down. I bet they didn't see that coming, did they?
No, they didn't.
So, Iran-Contra, okay? What you had is using federal funds for things that certain people in our government had never had permission for. Today, the John Birch Society has gotten hip to that. They're so wealthy, they're using private funds to do shit because guess what? Congress is not going to be able to make them answer for what they're doing because they're not using taxpayers' money. So if all you folks listening to this show today who come out and talking this bullshit like defund the police, you don't have a fucking clue to what you're doing because when you think you're fighting the system, you're doing exactly what the system wants. Private companies don't answer to government oversight committees. And that's what the John Birch Society and these so-called Tea Party libertarians want to do. They want to privatize everything. These are the same kind of people who had the Civil War. They did not want the federal government telling them they couldn't get rid of their niggers as slaves.
Well, I'm gonna sit there and speak on the privatizing because we that's what we get in Detroit right now in the districts.
Exactly.
Privatized policing.
So for you folks out there who want an idea of what I'm talking about, see the movie State of Play. Let me check, make sure that's the correct movie. But State of Play was a movie with Russell Crowe.
Mm-hmm.
Because that movie also has J-Lo's ex in it. And that movie shows you exactly what the plan was. to bring in people like Eric Prince and whatever name he uses for his mercenaries, because they don't use the term mercenary anymore, it's private contractors. This was already beginning to happen after Reagan left office, because you remember it was Ross Perot, Daddy Bush, and Bubba Clinton running for president in 1992. You know what they all have in common?
No.
They're all cousins and their families are all from the same small town in England. Folks don't even know that. But Ross Perot became famous because he had private contractors. And when people would get kidnapped from the U.S. and other countries, and the U.S. government seemed to be helpless in trying to rescue these wealthy white folks, Ross Perot would send his private mercenaries in, and they would rescue people that the State Department were seen to be unable to go after. In fact, there's a book out there about Ross Perot. I think it's called On the Wings of Eagles. I hate doing this while I'm talking to you, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to give the listeners the wrong information. But there's a Ross Perot book that details how Ross Perot is such a great bitching guy because he was able to bring back home kidnapped U.S. citizens when the U.S. State Department, CIA, and others seemed to be ineffective and couldn't pull it off. So with the Iran-Contra, what you had was, when we were talking about offshore bank accounts it's called On Wings of Eagles. So there's something else. I'll write this one down too. I told your listeners today about the book. And I have the book, but I'm not going to go looking for it right now. On Wings of Eagles. And it gives you an idea how Ross Perot became so popular in the white far-right wing. You know, he was a libertarian. He was a third-party candidate.
Right.
So a lot of the folks who you see supporting Donald Trump supported Ross Perot. And during that time period, I came on Carl's Joe here front page, and I told the listeners, because you know, they had so many black folks who live in Compton that call into the station. I said, I hear a lot of listeners come on this show, and you're from Compton. Just like the movie Straight Outta Compton. In fact, there's a woman, Molly Bell. It's sad because they stole that from her. Molly Bell had been saying Straight Outta Compton since 1965. And every time she would come on the show with Carl Nelson, she'd go, this is Molly Bell, Straight Outta Compton. And they don't even mention her name in that movie. That's her phrase. So that's something for you folks out there that you would never hear from anybody else. That Straight Outta Compton was stolen from Molly Bell, Mollie Bell. She's an activist and out there in the streets all her life fighting for black
Bell, how you spell her last name? B-E?
L-L, Molly Bell.
Okay.
She's on Facebook. She'll be glad to. And so she still comes on with Carl every once in a while on WOL in Washington, D.C. But Molly Bell worked at the post office for many years, and she finally retired. So all you have to do is put in Molly Bell Compton, and I'm sure something will come up with her name. But they stole that phrase Straight Outta Compton from Molly Bell, and they don't even mention her once in that movie. But this is what people do. They steal your information. They steal your shit. And when I say they, people who look like you steal your shit, and act like it's theirs. Okay. Oh, I just checked. Her Facebook literally says Molly Bell, Straight Outta Compton. So for you folks out there, you know, get in touch with Molly Bell, because if anybody should write a book, if anybody they should do a documentary on, if anybody who should be in the forefront to tell folks what the hell was really going on during the Ricky Ross days, and I ain't talking about this phony bullshit musician using the name Ricky Ross, and then the white man allows him to keep the name, okay, because he ain't the real Ricky Ross, okay? I mean, this story we're saying here today is going in so many directions, but they're all connected. Because, you know, it was down in Compton with Molly Bell and the folks, and then they came over to L.A., South Los Angeles, to Locke High School. Well, it was at Locke High School where the CIA director came to talk to the community. Now, I was with LAPD at the time. I was a Marine Corps reservist. I was not going to that meeting because I knew that meeting would be televised, filmed, or whatever. But somebody else who worked for LAPD with a similar background to mine, his name was Mike Rothmiller. He's dead now. drugs in, and you could hear a pin drop in the room because Michael Rothmiller was an undercover cop for LAPD who worked with a lot of federal agencies, and he was throwing the dirt out there, dude. For you folks who don't know what I'm talking about, the CIA director was John Deutsch, Deutch. 2 weeks later, John Deutsch was gone as CIA director. You can't make this shit up.
Right.
Molly Bell was there.
Yeah, I never heard of Molly Bell. I'm definitely about to do my research. I already got it wrote down. I never heard you really mention Molly Bell, but maybe you did, and I just didn't write it down.
And
keep
so
going,
John Deutsch was CIA director, as we call him back then, DCI, director of Central Intelligence. And after that meeting at Locke High School, he quietly went away. They showed some scenes from that very briefly in the movie American Made by Harvey Weinstein. So they came out with all this Me Too crap because they don't want you to go see the Harvey Weinstein movie. They did the same thing because, in fact, just tell you how deep that movie American Made was. People were murdered during that filming of that movie. So when you see Tom Cruise flying in the movie, he's doing his actual flying in the movie because he didn't want to have an accidental plane accident the way several other people died in plane accidents while they were filming the movie.
Right.
I'm not making this shit up, okay? And there's so much about that movie that I personally know, and I know there's some stuff in that movie that's not accurate because, the movie shows you Barry Seal getting recruited by CIA in the 70s working for TWA. Shit, Barry Seal was flying guns in for CIA in the Cuba back in the 50s. Because you know who we were supporting back in the 50s?
Who?
Fidel Castro. You're saying, but you don't understand. Hasn't the United States always been anti-Castro?
Right.
No, I just told you we were flying.
No, I mean, in my generation, Castro was always the enemy.
And this is what these folks do. They flip-flop all the time. You ever heard of Chairman Mao?
No.
China? Mao?
Yeah, I didn't know his name was Chairman Mao. Yeah,
Well,
Mao
that
from
was
China.
his title, like President Bush, Chairman Mao. Chairman is his title, not his name. Mao, guess who he came to first? He came to the U.S. and the U.S. told him no. Guess who Castro came to first? He came to the U.S. The U.S. was supporting Castro until they realized Castro was planning on booting out all the corrupt corporations from the U.S. along with the mafia. Because see, that's where the mafia had all their casinos. That was when Castro got in power and booted the motherfuckers out, that the casinos came to Las Vegas. See? So anyway, go back and watch the movie Godfather 2, and you'll see all that in the movie, the revolution down in Cuba. So I say this to you because when you have a white guy, formerly from LAPD, telling folks in the room that the CIA was facilitating the drugs coming into South Los Angeles, and then the CIA director has to resign 2 weeks later, okay, that opened up a whole can of worms. And then, of course, you had movies out there that come right out and show you. There was a guy who worked for the San Jose Mercury News, and he did this big expose. They ended up doing a movie about him. He's the only guy I know who committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head. You can't make this shit up.
we got Mark from Anaheim right here on the show, so you already know there's some deep shit going on.
But yeah, so he shot himself twice in the head. I was like, damn, how the fuck you do some shit like that, man? And you don't even know what I'm talking about, do you?
No, I don't.
So I gotta type this in because right now with everything going on, San Jose Mercury News, cocaine. I just put that in. And you guys, when you hear this show, you can just do that same thing. I'm gonna type this in: San Jose Mercury News, cocaine. Oh, CIA Contra. Yeah, okay. Because I want to get the guy's accurate name because I know you got some research warriors out there that's listening to the show. Already, all kinds of shit coming up. So this is back in 1996. The San Jose did a 3-part series on CIA and bringing the cocaine in. In fact, the guy wrote a book
Well, yeah, isn't that the guy that showed up to a meeting or something, or it was some type of he was saying I'm from the news, and this was in California. It's a white dude.
Yeah, he he has a book and he came out with a movie. It's called Dark Alliance.
No, I know Dark Alliance. I like the
But
one,
you can find the book Dark Alliance. You can find the movie Dark Alliance, and it talks about him because after he did the first of all, he was one of these guys when he ended up doing that series. All of a sudden, he's doing stories about women's flower shows and stuff.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do nothing else.
I'm sorry?
I said he probably didn't want to do nothing else after that.
No, you're not hearing me, brother. They busted him and gave him no more to do than that. You don't want to be doing no damn stories about women's fashion shows and flower shows. You're not going to make a name for yourself in the news business doing that.
Right.
You got to go out there and get a story that's going to make the front page. He was on the front page. They fucked him. And then the LA Times and all these other news, like New York Times, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, everybody was backing him until CIA and other folks go, hey, let it go. Next thing you know, they were labeling him a conspiratorial and a fucking paranoid. Yeah.
Yeah, I know the guy exactly who you're talking about. He was from the Mercury, yeah.
And he's the guy who laid it out. That's how folks found out about Freeway Ricky Ross.
So what we got with the Bill Cosby being released right now?
Dude, what are we talking about here? We're not talking about Bill. See, you're doing it again. I'll write that down. One, I got to come back and talk about Blood Oath. Two, I got to come back and talk about the Shaw.
Right.
And now you want me to talk about Bill Cosby. See, this is how they distract you. I'm just going to ask you a question real quick since you brought up Bill Cosby. What about Bill Cosby affects your personal life?
Nothing.
Then why the fuck do you care? This is what they use to distract you. So since you brought up Bill Cosby, allow me to tell you why they did that on that day. While you were busy watching Bill Cosby get released from prison, while you were busy being distracted about some black girl smoking dope and can't race in her single trophy medal winning at the Olympics, the U.S. Supreme Court just took your fucking rights away to vote. Do you even know that?
No.
Hello?
No.
That's what happened this week. What was left of the fucking Voting Rights Act was removed this week by the John Birch Society controlled U.S. Supreme Court. And you folks don't even know it because they purposely do it right before the damn holiday where you all worried about your fucking barbecue and shit. And then to distract you, they put out Bill Cosby getting released from prison and some black girl with tattoos all over her ass who smoked some marijuana. Meanwhile, Arizona, and see, this is how the John Birch Society operates, okay? They will purposely file a case in court, knowing that that case was going to lose. Well, let me rephrase that. They will purposely pass a law in some place like Arizona, Texas, South Carolina, Florida, you name it, the so-called red states, knowing that it's going to be challenged and that case is going to lose on the lower level federal court. Then they will appeal it. When they appeal it, where does it go?
To the Supreme Court, right?
And who now runs the fucking Supreme Court?
The John Birch, you would say.
So, what you have is, if that law had passed in Arizona, it would only apply to Arizona. Once you appeal it, and it now goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, it applies to what?
The country.
There you go, folks. So allow me to enlighten you since your brother keeps distracting me with nonsense here. This week, the Supreme Court has basically gotten rid of the Voting Rights Act. When Kennedy ran for president, Kennedy didn't give a shit about black folks, okay? I get sick and tired of seeing black folks with the KKK on their wall, or all these black churches that used to have the the KKK on fans when you go into a black church. And when I say KKK, I'm talking about John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy didn't give a damn about black folks. John F. Kennedy, when he was in college, supported Hitler and thought Hitler was a bitching guy. John F. Kennedy is a politician. He wants to become president, and he knew he couldn't become president without the black vote. And at that time, still, because Lincoln was a Republican, most blacks in this country were registered Republicans. They started doing a flip-flop when FDR ran for president, because while so-called Mensa member intellects like Tom Hartman, the #1 progressive talk show host in the country, who, by the way, his father was a high-ranking member of the John Birch Society, or you got Stephanie Miller, who's the female progressive #1 talk show in the country, who, by the way, her father was a high-ranking member of the John Birch Society. When they're telling you that the so-called Southern strategy began with Nixon and Reagan, that's bullshit. The Southern strategy began with Herbert Hoover. He inherited the stock market collapse. People blamed him for it. He was desperate to get reelected, so he decided to divide the niggers from the white folks in the South. That's where the Southern strategy began. People have been playing off that ever since the days of Herbert Hoover. I share history, not his story. And when FDR became president, FDR, running as a Democratic, promised black folks things that the Republican Party kept promising them but never delivered. So black folks supported FDR. He got elected, and FDR did what was called the New Deal. In the New Deal, you had things like the GI Bill. The average white person in this country never had a house until the GI Bill, much less a black person. Under FDR, he did things like the WPA, the Works Progress Agency, where they were giving people jobs by building the infrastructure. Do we not right now have fucking bridges falling down? Roads having sinkholes collapsing?
Yeah, I just rode through the Cincinnati Bridge.
The power grid is all fucked up.
Yes, it is.
Okay? We could be putting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to work right now to rebuild our infrastructure. And you don't see Biden doing shit. You didn't see Obama do shit. And you damn sure aren't going to see the Republicans do it, because if they get that infrastructure, who do you think they want doing the work? I'm asking you.
The foreigners.
The private corporations.
Okay.
That way they can turn it into their fucking boondoggle. Because going back to what I was trying to tell you about the Iran-Contra, when Ollie North was on that fucking stand, and the reason Senator Inouye from Hawaii shut the meeting down, I told you that Ollie North said they were going to round up 25 million black folks. Do you want to know what that operation was going to be called?
What was it?
Rex, R-E-X 84. Ever heard of it?
I heard of it. Yes, I have.
And that was created right here in California. It stands for Readiness Exercise 84. Because, see, when Jimmy Carter was president, Jimmy Carter passed legislation where FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, would help people in this country. Hurricanes, floods, earthquakes. Reagan and the John Birch Society comes in, and they turn FEMA into a response for domestic terrorism. They don't give a fuck about helping you during no hurricane. And so, under domestic terrorism mandate, they came up with Readiness Exercise 84. They also had a thing called Garden Plot, Operation Garden Plot. Ever heard of that?
No.
During the riots in 1992, there were National Guard right here in LA that their orders were stamped. Guess what was on the orders?
What was it?
Operation Garden Plot. So that's something else for you folks out there. Rex 84, Operation Garden Plot. Well, when Ollie North started talking about that, Senator Inouye, he shut the meeting down. We're talking about national security. We'll have to talk about this behind closed doors. But I'm happy to say before Inouye was able to accomplish that. And now you can go on YouTube. I mean, there's all kinds of YouTube that show it, where Ali Nall tells you the plan to round up 25 million black folks under Operation Garden Plot Rex 84. And that's why when Hurricane Katrina hit, I hate to say this guy had my name, Michael Brown was appointed as the FEMA director for Bush. He didn't have a fucking clue how to respond to the hurricane, because that's not what their plan is. Their plan is to respond to take you down, to round you up. Bush didn't even land. No, I'm not talking Daddy Bush. This is G.W. Bush, the son. He flew overhead. He didn't even land down there in New Orleans. And talk about, Bronny's doing a good job. In fact, since I'm talking about Hurricane Katrina, most of the damage there was not done by the hurricane, right?
Right. It was done by the levees being blew up or something.
No, not blown up. You get these fucking Republican libertarians in office who are in bed with the damn oil industry, and they pass legislation where they remove all the natural barriers to allow the big oil barges to come in to get that oil out of Louisiana. So what would have normally stopped the surge from the tidal waves had been removed. That's why so many people died. Now, instead of coming in and rescue people, who were the first people they sent into New Orleans?
Humanitarian help.
Mercenaries. Mercenaries came in on black helicopters and landed on those barges that were being used as gambling casinos, because they wanted to make sure they got their money out of those safes before niggers and poor white people got on those ships and got that money. Then, when there were people trying to help other folks, they put the fucking cops and stuff on the highway with guns and stopped them from even coming across the bridge to help people who needed help. Well, you sitting here talking about humanitarian. Yeah, I don't know what world you live in.
Right.
So, what I'm trying to tell you is, unlike back in those days when they were using federal money for all this shit, now they use private money, and it's going to be a lot harder to follow the money trail or to hold them accountable because they're not using taxpayers' money. And there's a big fight going on within those guys because, NRA and Ali Nall are not seeing eye to eye anymore. And as you probably were made aware of this week, while folks were distracted with Bill Cosby, while folks were distracted with a smoke-doping Olympic hopeful, Donald Trump's corporation was indicted. Are you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of it.
This is what I'm talking about, folks. Donald Trump's corporation was indicted, and this brother who I'm talking to, he tries his best to keep up with what's going on. So he's not aware of it. Do you think the average person in this country has a fucking clue to what I'm talking about? So I'm just telling you, this happened yesterday. Well, actually, it happened on Thursday. The U.S. Supreme Court decided a major case on voting rights that essentially gutted what's left of the Voting Rights Act. Because, see, Kennedy was a politician. He got the black vote based on he was going to pass a Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act. So what did? They whacked his ass. He was murdered on 22 November 1963. By the way, same John Birch Society posters you saw in Dallas, Texas on 22 November are the same posters I saw when Obama was president. I had some white John Birch Society guy sending me one of these bullshit, Obama this, that, and the other. I go, you act like you think you know something. And I sent him a photograph from 1963. I go, look at the sign from 1963 in Dallas, and look at the thing you just sent me. The only thing they did was took Kennedy's face off of it, put an Obama logo at the top, and word for word, it was the same bullshit. Because people in this country don't read. None of this stuff that's going on is new. It's all regurgitated. I'm serious. It's all regurgitated. So what's happening is Kennedy was whacked. Johnson was now president. Johnson's a Democratic, but he was from what state? Do you know?
No.
Thank you. See how quick and easy that was? He's from Texas. Is Texas a liberal state?
I wouldn't say they're liberal. I mean, they more,
That was a yes or no question.
No.
Thank you. So let's move on. So he was a Southern Democratic. Folks, get it through your head. The Southern Democrats are normally to the right of the Republican Party. That's why I laugh when people saw Bill Clinton in the White House. Bill Clinton ain't no liberal. Bill Clinton is from Arkansas. That's a right-to-work state. In other words, unions don't even have no fucking power down there. They don't give a fuck about employees' rights. So anyway, Kennedy was gone. Johnson was president. And blacks are still waiting for the deal that had been cut. And Johnson's like, hey, you cut that deal with Kennedy. In fact, that's one of the reasons why King was assassinated. Because King wouldn't sit down on this. King demanded Johnson do it. And all these other black, because King was a boule, by the way. All these other black boule, they're sitting there saying, you can't talk to the president that way. And so you started seeing all this anti-Martin Luther King Jr. propaganda coming out in the 60s. And some of it was written by House Negroes like Thurgood Marshall in newspapers around the country. A lot of folks were angry because Martin Luther King Jr. was getting more attention than anybody else. A lot of folks out of jealousy didn't like his opinion. But he demanded that Johnson follow through on what Kennedy had promised the black folks. So in 1964, you had the Civil Rights Bill. In 1965, you had the Voting Rights Act. Wake the fuck up, black people, or you woke white people. That Voting Rights Act has basically been gutted as of Thursday, July 2nd, 2021, while you folks are worried about Bill Cosby. Because that case from Arizona made it to the Supreme Court, and with Donald Trump's John Birch Society appointed judges, along with House Negro Clarence Thomas and the folks who were already there before Trump got in, it's going to be a 6-3 every time now. They've got a 6-3 majority. Oh, they'll probably get a 7-2 majority soon, too. Because when Thurgood Marshall was president, he knew he was sick, but these motherfuckers can't give up the power. So instead of him retiring and allowing Jimmy Carter to put somebody on the Supreme Court, he was going to wait until Jimmy Carter got reelected. But because of the Iran-Contra scandal and everything going on, the same folks with Iran-Contra are the ones who told the Ayatollah, since you want to bring up the Shah, they told the Ayatollah to hold the Marine hostages so that Jimmy Carter wouldn't get reelected. And 2 hours after Reagan got sworn in, all the hostages were released. And people saying, see, Iran's afraid of Reagan. See how quick they... Please. They were selling fucking weapons to Iran. That's what it's called. Iran-Contra scandal. Duh.
Man.
But we don't negotiate with terrorists. What the fuck do you think it's called Iran-Contra scandal? The money from the drugs coming from down in Central America was used to buy the weapons that were being sold to Iran. To this day, we have no idea how many Stinger missiles made in the U.S. are in the hands of so-called terrorists because of what the Reagan administration did during Iran-Contra. And Trump brought a lot of those guys back, like William Barr. You ever heard that name?
Yeah, yes.
Well, when Daddy Bush was still president, Reagan was already too senile, so they weren't going after Reagan. But during the Iran-Contra thing, Daddy Bush was going to go to prison. And he was stressed. So William Barr goes, no problem, dude. By the way, William Barr worked for Daddy Bush when Daddy Bush was DCI, Director of Central Intelligence. See, I know who these guys are. I should. A lot of them. Well, we belong to the same clubs. Anyway, so Daddy Bush was stressed because he was going to go to prison. So Barr said, hey, no problem. Just pardon everybody. And that's what Daddy Bush did. So he pardoned Poindexter. He pardoned Ollie North. He pardoned all the Iran-Contra war criminals. So there was nobody for Congress to have to testify against Daddy Bush. By the way, we talked about Cuba earlier, and we talked about Castro. What was the big invasion that the U.S. did in Cuba? When Kennedy was president.
Um, the Bay of the Pigs or something. The Bay of the Pigs or something. Yeah.
Cochinos. Yeah, cochinos. Sorry, I'm doing my Bay of Pigs. Cochina is pig in Spanish. Come on, man. So anyway, Kennedy wasn't behind that. See, they assumed that Nixon was going to become president after Eisenhower. Because even though Eisenhower was president, Nixon was ONI. You don't fuck with ONI. Do you know what ONI is?
No.
Office of Naval Intelligence. Most of my mentors were OSS, Office of Strategic Services, ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, and former Nazis we brought over here from World War II. So I came on that radio show Front Page down here, and I said, you guys don't even know who runs this country. I go, when Eisenhower was president, Nixon was vice president, ONI. Well, Nixon didn't get elected, so who got elected in 1960?
I'm not familiar right now.
Kennedy.
Okay.
God dang.
Okay.
Kennedy was ONI. His vice president was Lyndon Baines Johnson, ONI. Kennedy gets whacked. Who became president?
Lyndon.
ONI. After Johnson said he's not going to run for re-election, who became president in 68? Nixon.
Right.
ONI, I already told you that. So now Nixon hauls ass before he gets impeached during his second term. Gerald Ford becomes the interim president that nobody ever voted for. You had a president and vice president in the White House that nobody ever voted for. Well, guess what Gerald Ford was? ONI. After Gerald Ford, who was president?
You got Reagan or something?
Jimmy Carter.
No, Carter. It was Carter, then Reagan. You're right.
You do know Jimmy Carter was a Navy commander, right?
No, I didn't know that.
Submarine commander. ONI. Do you see a pattern here? Yes? No? Do you see a pattern here?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So while people think they know what's going on, they don't have a fucking clue. And the sad thing is, nothing I just shared with you, people can't find out if they actually research. Just like, for example, the Supreme Court. Notice how they keep talking about the 6-3 majority and how the Republicans now have their people on the Supreme Court who are not acting like judges, but acting as if they're politicians. And they play this left versus right on the Supreme Court. But you know what nobody's talking about? Every fucking member of the Supreme Court is a Catholic. Didn't I just talk about the Catholic Church owning more property in this country than anybody else?
Even Clarence.
Didn't I talk about the Catholic Church and how they dominated Spain and ruled the world? You go down to any country south. You go to any country south of Texas, Arizona, and California, and except for Brazil and I think one other country, what language do they speak?
Spanish?
Exactly.
Right.
That's the Catholic Church. That's Spain. Spanish. And then during World War II, Spain was smart. They sat the war out. But they didn't sit the war out because they were giving all kinds of supplies to Hitler. You ever watch any Mexican soap operas, as we call them, bordellos? See all the white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans in those soap operas?
Right.
You ever heard of Argentina?
Yeah, Argentina.
Do you know what the word Argentine means?
No, but
white as silver. Because the people running that country don't look like the natives down there. In fact, you go to Peru, the Japanese were still running Peru. This woman who just lost the election is now doing the same shit that Trump said, saying how she got robbed. She's Japanese. Folks don't even know who run those countries. The Japanese, Italy, and Germany were the Axis powers, with Spain in the background providing them with all kinds of assets. While people want to sit here and talk about D-Day, that's not what won the war. If they want to claim that Germany lost the war. They lost the war because they needed resupplies, and the resupplies came from the South American countries. And after the war, guess where a lot of Nazis fled to? Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Chile, Bolivia, You know, they got a movie called Boys from Brazil. It shows you how they were trying to clone Hitler down there in Brazil.
Yeah, I watched that movie. I actually watched the movie.
Yeah. So, what you're seeing happening is, during the John Birch Society days, they were in countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala. So I'm going to ask you a question. Where are most of the illegal immigrants in this country today? Where are they from?
I would say Mexican.
And you live in Detroit, and I've already said this to you in a phone call, they're from fucking Canada. See how you're programmed? The majority of illegal immigrants in this country are white folks from Canada, and nobody stops to check them because they're white. They come over here on work visas, they come here on student visas, and when their visas expire, they don't go home. The vast majority of people who you see coming across the border, they're not from Mexico. They're from El Salvador. They're from Nicaragua. They're from Guatemala. They're from Honduras. They're from all the countries where the John Birch Society has gone down there and fucked their country. They can no longer live down there, and they have to come through Mexico to make it to the U.S. That's the real deal. And I will never lie to you or your listeners. So don't get it twisted, because they program you to say these folks are taking your jobs. See, in the old days, they used to tell white folks the niggers are taking their jobs. Now they're telling you the immigrants are taking your jobs. Meanwhile, there's robots and fucking algorithms and artificial intelligence that's taking all the jobs. But while we're busy fighting each other down here for the crumbs, we don't realize there's a bigger agenda. So when you asked the question earlier about blood oath, because I don't know how long you want to go with the show, and it's hard to believe, dude. We've been on the air for an hour and a half already. Anyway, Blood Oath is a book that was written by a guy named Stephen Worth. Last name is, well, I guess it's W-R-T-H, isn't it? Stephen Worth. And this book I knew nothing about. I get a phone call one day from Stevie Wonder asking me to come down to the radio station. Because see, when I did radio shows, as I said earlier, I didn't use my real name. And I never went to the radio station because everybody wanted to know who the fuck this guy was coming on the radio. And I wasn't going to reveal my identity. So I always did the radio show from home, just like I'm doing with you right now. So Stevie calls me up. I waited till like 10 o'clock in the day when nobody's hanging around to see who's on the coming from the front page show. Stevie hands me this book and says, hey, I need you to go home and read this book and tell me what you think. Because the guy wants to come on our show, but I trust your judgment, and I want you to read the book and tell me whether this guy should be allowed to come on the show or not. I took the book home and read it in one night. I said, hey, tell Stevie, get this motherfucker on the show. Because there was stuff in that book that I had only seen in news broadcasts once before it was taken down. There was stuff in that book that I already knew. There's no way in the world a person who wrote that book could have known that unless he talked to the actual killers of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. And that book, if you read that book, you'll know that they talked about a group in there called CAUSE, Christian Aryan Underground Special Enforcers. And they brag about how they've got their Nazis throughout all the police departments in the country and in the military. So when they just plan on taking over, they're going to do it. And that book was written back in the early 90s. Now you're starting to see them do it. Well, they tried to do it on January 6th on Capitol Hill. You folks, well, I don't know when you're going to put this show out there, but I know I'm telling you, watch your ass, because this is 4th of July weekend. Did you hear what happened in Massachusetts today?
No.
11 black guys were arrested. Now, why would 11 black guys all be sitting on the side of the road with high-powered rifles? See, this story already tells me it's bullshit, but this is the official story. Because while you're focusing on the niggers, it's the white folks that's going to be coming for you. So they made a big deal. Every news story in the country today talk about the Massachusetts State Police taking 11 guys into custody in a standoff near Boston because supposedly these guys, they call themselves the Moorish Americans. Have you ever heard of the Moorish Americans?
Yes.
Well, that's who these guys were. And they allegedly were in 2 vehicles stopped on the side of the highway, armed with high-powered rifles, And when this one cop asked them who they were, they said, hey, we're sovereign citizens, you know, trying to act like white folks, because white folks love to use that sovereign citizen bullshit. We're sovereign citizens. We don't recognize U.S. law, and we don't have to talk to you. And then they all took off in the woods with their guns. So after several hours of standoff, they all got arrested, and that's what you'll be hearing about this weekend while you're distracted. Now, meanwhile, I can't even begin to tell you, well, California leads the country in hate groups. I can't begin to tell you how many fucking white groups are like that you never hear anything about, but this is the only story being talked about today, and you haven't even heard about it. Because we're talking about Bill Cosby. We're talking about some black girl who smoked the joint after her mother just died. Hell, I'd smoke a joint too. Her mom was there for her when she made all those accomplishments. So I can understand she had a lapse in judgment. But you got to follow the rules. You come up positive, hey, you get spanked. So you brought up the Shah. The Shah of Iran was somebody we put in office. What happened was, back in the early 1900s, you ever hear people use the term Middle East?
Yes.
I don't use that term. You know why I don't use that term?
Why?
Because it's Africa. It's not the Middle East. See, white folks just come up with names and we just repeat the shit. Just like Kuwait. I don't use the name Kuwait because that's Iraq. I don't use the name Pakistan because that's India. I don't use the name North or South Korea because it was all Korea. I don't use the name North or South Vietnam because it was all Vietnam. Just because white folks come in and decide they're going to divide this country to take the resources and they just rename shit doesn't mean that's the way it is. And we just repeat this shit. So, with the Suez Canal being built, that split off that part of Africa. And just like the Panama Canal, they built that Suez Canal so they can access, their ships and stuff. That was back in the days of the Ottoman Empire. All this shit going on right now with Israel is because people are going back to the days of the Ottoman Empire. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, if you look at a map, the former Soviet Union countries now are all back to being independent. It looks like the maps look before World War I. We're headed for a world war. U.S. is going to be in a civil war, but we're headed for a world war also. So, you got to reduce the population. That's what wars are about. You got to reduce the population. I don't give a shit what war was. It's about reducing the population. Reducing the population and gaining mineral resources or whatever that country has. So, the British cut deals with certain sellouts and created, like the Arab-Arabian, what they call it, the Arab-Arabian but British oil companies. Today you know it as BP, British Petroleum. But you have what was called Aramco. You ever heard of Aramco?
Vaguely, I've heard of it. I have heard of it.
Because Aramco is the fucking biggest on the planet. People like to talk about Exxon Mobil and shit. You don't fuck with Aramco. I have a newspaper, LA Times, 2-page fucking ad in 1996, I believe, where, because Bill Clinton was in the White House, but they were bragging about the 50-year cozy relationship between all U.S. presidents and the Saudis. And it's interesting because you mentioned the World Trade Center. Well, who was behind that?
They said it was the Saudis, but as we started...
So why the fuck we bomb Iraq and Afghanistan? In fact, George W. Bush, so I'm sorry, it was 1995. On Valentine's Day 1995, there was a full-page ad in the Los Angeles Times, because I'm looking at it. I'm a fucking... You guys would call me a hoarder. I call myself a researcher, but, I have a full-page ad here, and it says, celebrating a half-century of friendship. And it has the Saudi symbol at the bottom, and it shows every president from FDR all the way through Bill Clinton, because this is 1995. and the cozy relationship we have with the Saudis. Now, see what the Saudis do. We have the far right wing in this country, the evangelicals, the apostolics, and the who are the other ones? The evangelicals, apostolic, and Pentecostals. Whereas over there, they have the far right wing, basically the Wahhabi. Now, you had a white guy named, they like to call him Lawrence of Olivier or whatever.
Lawrence of Arabia.
That's exactly right. See? I like that. I test you and you pass. And you're listening. So Lawrence of Arabia, he had already cut deals with the major leaders, not knowing that back in London, he was being backstabbed by other people who had other plans. So instead of getting this oil out of that region from rational, sane Muslim leaders, London was cutting deals with the Wahhabi. And those are the guys behind the major terrorist attacks around the world. Just like the batshit crazy far right wing in this country don't speak for the average Christian, the Wahhabis do not speak for the average Muslim. And they want an Armageddon. They want an all-out caliphate where they destroy the planet. A good TV series that showed, it only lasted one season. In fact, I'm surprised they even allowed it on the air once. But there's a TV series called Dig, D-I-G, just like digging a hole. Watch that series, because that series show you these batshit crazy Christians, Muslims, and Jews all coming together for Armageddon, which is why Trump moved that embassy to Jerusalem. That's going to be the catalyst for World War III. Trust me, I'm not making this shit up. I've been warning folks about this for decades now, and now it's coming to fruition. So, and that's why you didn't see Biden do a damn thing it was a blood moon when they killed those Palestinians recently. They always do shit on a blood moon, and even in that TV show Dig, they show you the significance of a blood moon. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. So what you have was Mossadegh was the leader of Iran back in the 50s. And Mossadegh started asking questions like, wait a minute, this is our fucking oil. Why are the British and the U.S. getting 80% of the profits and we only get 20%?
Well, I'm thinking it's, well, the U.S. I guess came in with the technology, supposedly, they didn't want them to make technology.
So Mossadegh says we should be getting the 80% profit. You motherfuckers get 20%. So when Mossadegh told that to the U.S. and Great Britain, that's when you started seeing all the propaganda coming out calling Mossadegh a communist, because that's what the John Birch Society does. Now, I have to tell you, the John Birch Society at that time wasn't formulated into the John Birch Society. They came around pretty much after MacArthur was relieved of duty. So when folks think that Make America Great Again is all about making America white again, yeah, they might be bigots, but they feel that this country has not been great since Truman fired MacArthur, who was planning on bombing China. Because, see, John Birch was a private contractor who was tortured and murdered in China. So they hate China. They consider John Birch the first casualty of the war on communism. John Birch was never a member of the John Birch Society. One of the founding members of the John Birch Society, his two sons have ruined this country, the Koch brothers. Fred Koch was a founding member of the John Birch Society, made most of his money in Russia, or back then the Soviet Union. Another founding member of the John Birch Society was MacArthur's right-hand man. So these guys have been around. They ran Barry Goldwater for president back in 1960 and 1964. And by the way, back in those days, who was the Barry Goldwater girl?
I would say what, Hillary?
Hillary Clinton, folks. Okay, notice how these folks all have connections to the John Birch Society? Because I said earlier about the 3 Ks, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy wanted to be the lead attorney for the John Birch Society. He even tried to get Joseph Kennedy to pull some strings for him. Couldn't do it. And the lead attorney became Roy Cohn. Have you ever heard the name Roy Cohn? C-O-H-N?
No.
That's Donald Trump's mentor. Everything Donald Trump does today, he learned from Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the #1 attorney for the John Birch Society and the #1 attorney for the biggest mafia cliques in New York. That's who Donald Trump brags and praises his mentor, Roy Cohn. Well, Roy Cohn became the lead attorney for the John Birch Society. This is when phony Joseph McCarthy, and I say phony because he was a Marine Corps officer, but he lied about being on 38 combat missions and stuff, and he lied about being a Mustang. He was no fucking Mustang. I'm a Mustang. A Mustang is an enlisted Marine or enlisted Navy personnel who becomes an officer. McCarthy was never enlisted. He just made shit up. Had his resume. But he's the one who led the charge in Hollywood against the Screen Actors Guild and all the people in Hollywood calling them communists. A lot of folks to this day can't get a job in Hollywood because their fathers or mothers were labeled a communist by McCarthy. Do you know who was the president of the Screen Actors Guild at that time that was giving McCarthy all the names?
No.
Ronald Reagan. Who, by that time was a Democratic. Because these folks flip-flop parties anytime it fits their need. So Reagan has been in bed with the John Birch Society from day one. And they hate the federal government. They want to privatize everything. In fact, what did Reagan say? Your biggest problem is the federal government. He labeled the federal government as being your biggest problem. And Trump just put it on steroids when he came in. So he destroyed the State Department, he destroyed FBI, he destroyed any agency that investigates tax fraud or mafia crimes. Those are the agencies Trump destroyed while he was president. The damage he has done to our intelligence community and our law enforcement infrastructure federally, people have no idea. The first thing Trump did when he became president was fire every ambassador in the State Department and replace him with people who gave him money when he was running for office. He replaced the guy at the IRS with somebody who was an attorney that fought the IRS. Because this is what the Republicans do. They put the very person in office who hates that agency, and their job is to make sure that agency looks incompetent and gets destroyed so they can replace it with a private agency or get rid of it altogether. They don't want to have anybody hold them accountable for anything. That's who these folks are. And you got dumbass niggas out there supporting them. These folks don't give a damn about the civil rights movement. They didn't give a damn. In fact, libertarians will tell you we would have never voted for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We would have never voted for the 1965 Voting Rights Act because we don't want the federal government telling us what we can do. And most of what black folks do in this country today is not in the Constitution. It's based on amendments and things like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights. And those are all being eliminated, step by step by step. And you got dumbass black folks out there leading the charge with these white folks to our own demise, and they don't even know it. It's like, I'll ask you a question. What even gives black folks the right to be in the U.S. military? And I don't use that term military, but I know that's how most people refer to it. I always say armed forces because military actually means it's a condescending term. But that's what folks like to say. So what gives black folks in this country the right to be in the U.S. military?
I would say some type of citizenship. You know, if you feel like you're a citizen of the U.S., it gives you a right.
The only thing that gives black folks the right to be in the military, Harry S. Truman signed an executive order back in the 1940s. So even with your knowledge, what do you know about an executive order? If you were president and you signed an executive order, and then I become president, what can I do with that executive order?
I could take it out.
So what I'm telling you right now, if Trump was the asshole everybody thought he was, he could have ordered every black person to leave the military and legally, there wasn't a fucking thing anybody could have done about it. Because the only thing that allows black people in the military is an executive order. And I challenge somebody who eventually hears this show to prove that I'm lying to you. Because folks in this country don't even know practically everything that white women do, blacks do, browns do, and even poor whites do is based on an executive order or some amendment to the Constitution. Well, Trump now has appointed enough people to the Supreme Court, along with guys like Clarence Thomas. They are constitutionalists. They belong to the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society does not recognize amendments to the Constitution. They want to go back to the original intent of the Founding Fathers. And the original intent of the Founding Fathers did not include blacks, did not include women, did not include Native Americans, and did not even include poor whites. You had to be a wealthy, white, male landowner. That's all what was included of the original intent of the Founding Fathers. What gives you the right to vote in this country?
Right. An amendment. Right.
There's absolutely nothing in the Constitution that says anybody in this country has the right to vote. But see, people have been misled. They don't read. They stop taking classes on civics. You know who stopped that, by the way? The John Birch Society. William Bennett hated the education. Well, let me go back. Jimmy Carter was the first president that established the education department as a separate entity. Before that, it was called the Human Education Welfare Program. Jimmy Carter made the education program a separate cabinet position. But because he didn't get reelected, he wasn't even able to appoint the first person to the cabinet. Reagan comes in, he appoints William Bennett. William Bennett used to brag about how he wanted to destroy the education department. That's why your education in this country is so fucked up today. And now probably as much as 40 to 60% of your schools, including Detroit, are privatized charter schools. Because they want to take over all the education. And once they take it over, you're not going to be learning about slavery. You're not going to be learning about what happened to black folks in this country. Because they're going to they're putting in their brand of history. Reagan was the greatest president. You know they say that, right? By the way, you know, they just came out with a survey. Obama's like in the top 5. Donald Trump is like number, I don't know, he's way down. He's like 5 from the bottom or something. But if these motherfuckers have it their way, when they go into schools, it'll be Reagan number 1 and Trump number 2 as the greatest presidents of all time. Because they just rewrite history. That's what they're doing. They're rewriting history.
History. So we getting down to the end. We got I got like
So I just want to finish quickly here with the Shah.
Go ahead.
Mossadegh was labeled a communist, and CIA guys like Kermit Roosevelt, yeah, he was related to FDR. They overthrew Mossadegh, and we put the Shah of Iran in office. And then what happens by the time Reagan becomes president, the Shah had so much anti-Shah protest against him because he had the Savak. The Savak was like our CIA, except the Savak dude, them motherfuckers are ruthless. People talk about Mossad. Savak and Mossad are pretty much equal when it comes to ruthlessness. And so the Shah killed so many of his own people, he lost a lot of popularity. So the Shah ended up getting replaced by the Ayatollah, who, by the way, was from France. So what I'm telling you is, even the Ayatollah was put into office by the U.S. and Europe, and people don't even know that. It's a game they play. So while you think we're fighting, when you think you're fighting the enemy, I just ask people all the time, name me one person who's a president or in charge of a country in Africa that wasn't put there by the U.S. or Europe. Just one. They won't be able to do it.
There's none.
So I know we're coming down to the end here, so I hope I addressed and answered your question about blood oath, the Shah, and what else did you want me to talk about? Did I wrote down.
I think the last question was we dealing with the Henry Ford, and so Henry Ford just came
Henry
out
Ford. It's not
yesterday.
Henry Ford. It's Heinrich Ford.
Heinrich Ford, but came out with all
Because
employees.
he came out with that book, International Jew. And so all you dumbass folks who are QAnon and stuff and acting like you're sophisticated, all they did was take the words that Nazi Heinrich Ford's book, International Jew, and where his book said Jew, they replaced it with Democrat. Because they were accusing Jews of taking the babies and using them for sacrifices and taking their blood. And you folks are just dumbasses, man. And falling for the shit. I know the earth is flat. I know.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, Nazi. But since you're from Detroit, brother, here's something I want to leave with your listeners that's close to home, okay? Here in California, we have a town called Moore Park. Moorpark. Moore Park, one word. You know something else? How come you never asked me about Garland Hardiman?
Never heard of him.
I think you better write that down if you never heard of him. Garland, G-A-R, as in land, L-A-N-D, Hardiman. You got homework, dude. You got serious homework. Hardiman and I work together at LAPD. He's back in Detroit now, because he's just like James Craig. You know, we program him here in L.A., and they go back and do what they were programmed to do here, and you don't even know it. Hardiman's a major player in Detroit for you not to know who he is. Anyway, Moore Park was 100% powered by nuclear power back in the late 50s. And they had a major nuclear meltdown. Not 3 Mile Island. The worst nuclear meltdown in U.S. history was right here in the Santa Susana Mountains. Now, why am I telling you this? Folks, do some homework, because the same thing happened in Detroit. Are you aware of that, brother?
No.
So here's a book that you all should read. We Almost Lost Detroit. It's by John Fuller. And that book will tell you how the same thing that happened here in California happened in Detroit with a nuclear disaster. And you folks don't even know about it. Oh, and that shit's all in your drinking water. I know I'm laughing, but if I don't laugh, I'll go crazy. So I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm just laughing because it's amazing the shit that goes on, and people think they know, and they think they're woke, and they don't have a fucking clue. I was warning about Flint, Michigan long before you heard about it. So when it happened, that's why I like Facebook, because it documents the time and the date of it, and I just brought it back and go, didn't I tell you all about this back then? Didn't I tell you about the nuclear disaster in Detroit? Didn't I tell you how they were going to come in with private contractors and take over all the elected positions in Detroit? Because that's what your governor did at the time. Wasn't that Rick Snyder?
When they took over, no, it wasn't Snyder. It was I want to say it was Engler before Snyder. It might have been Snyder. Might have been Snyder.
No, it was Snyder, dude.
It probably was Snyder. I think it probably was Snyder.
Snyder comes in and he replaced elected officials with private people who were now running government agencies. Because that's what they were planning on doing with Trump in the White House. They wanted Trump to get reelected, and he was going to replace all government officials with private officials the same way Snyder. Michigan was the test. Michigan was the testing ground for what they have planned for the rest of the United States. And you folks don't even know it. Then you got House Negro Obama. He's going to come out there and then drink the water. Talk about, there's nothing wrong with the water. And you know damn well he wasn't drinking no tap water. Talk about a slap in the face for all the black folks who voted for him, supported him, and were so happy to see him come because they thought their savior was coming. This motherfucker comes out there and acts like he's drinking the tap water, and then he sent the military in there to do operations. They used all the homes and stuff that nobody were living in. They were using the homes for military come in and use to train to go to war. And by the way, they didn't even tell the neighborhood. So when they heard all the attacks and stuff, they thought they thought the town was under attack. That's your Obama, but that's why they put him in office. So I know we're running out of time, but I hope that helps your listeners. You know, hey man, maybe you should edit this show and make it 2 shows.
man, we always love for you to come back, man. You already, you know.
Well, what you have to do, okay, brother, do me a favor. What I want you to do, because I'm sure you're going to get a lot of response from these. Your listeners have questions. Write those questions down so the next time I can come on, we can confine it to some specific subject areas. But the thing that, if nothing else today, the most important thing, folks, go back and see what the Supreme Court did this week on the Voting Rights Act because that's going to affect all of us. All this other bullshit, also pay attention because these Trump cultists are not happy and they have not gone away. And you're going to start seeing things like depicted. So watch the movie Arlington Road. That movie came out years ago, but it was back when Clinton was president. Well, that movie Arlington Road showed you how these white folks would go out and do terrorist attacks and make it look like the left, blacks, and other people did it. Because they want to make Biden look like he's doesn't have the ability to make you feel safe. That way, when they get back in the White House, dude, if they get back in the White House in 2024, you can kiss the shit goodbye. Hey, you won't be doing this radio show anymore. I'll tell you that right now. Anything else, brother?
No, and that's pretty much it. I'll be keeping in touch with you. This was
So
an
now
excellent.
So now I can go take a nap and dream about all those white girls now?
Right. This is an excellent show. Like I said, I'm gonna take it. It will be released tomorrow, and
You got lots of homework.
lots of homework. I wrote a lot of shit down, man, and we already know we love listening to Mark when you come out and about, man, and drop the knowledge.
So if you hear about my suicide, it didn't go down that way.
Right.
Later.
Peace. So, that was a legendary Mark from Anaheim. It was a long show. A lot of knowledge. See you. I'm Judo Woke Ace. This is Truth Talk Nation. I'm out.